Mere days since AMD's new FidelityFX Super Resolution version 2 went officially open source, and intrepid modders are already getting to work. Although it's still in its early days, there's already a mod that adds FSR 2 to Cyberpunk 2077. The mod is described as being a proof of concept and that we should expect bugs, but I decided to jump in with both feet. FSR 2.0's temporal upscaling method promises enhanced image quality compared to the spatial upscaler of the previous version, and so is more in line with what you might expect from proprietary upscalers like nVidia DLSS and Unreal Engine's temporal Super Resolution. Like those systems, it's a more involved process to integrate FSR 2 into a game compared to FSR 1. Whereas apps like lossless scaling and driver-level functions like AMD RSR and nVidia image scaling can apply spatial upscaling to essentially any game, to get FSR 2 in any given title, we have to wait for the game's developers to add it. That is, if modders don't get there first. Potato of Doom 1337, the modder in question, posted the Cyberpunk FSR 2 update to Nexus Mods. Downloading and installing the mod is a cinch. There's a link to Nexus Mods in the description if you want to try it yourself, but if you'd rather wait for a newer revision or until CDPR implements an official update, or if you're just curious, by all means keep watching. The test setup is my usual moderately priced gaming PC, using a Ryzen 5 5600G and 16 gigs of DDR4 3600, and I'm using a Radeon RX 480 4GB, which was just what happened to be installed at the time. It's actually a couple of models older than the minimum recommended GPU for FSR 2. AMD recommends an RX 590 or GTX 1070 as a minimum, but as I've proven with God of War, there's still merit to using FSR 2 with lower spec GPUs. One thing that has been established though is that the performance benefit from FSR 2 is not as great as with FSR 1. To see how big of a difference there is, I'm going to run my standard test drive from Mega Building 10 to the city centre at native 1080, 1440 and 2160 with the medium quality preset, then again with each level of FSR 2, and finally with each level of FSR 1. Let's start at the top. 3840 by 2160 is far beyond the capabilities of this GPU. It manages an average of just 14 frames per second and is obviously pretty far from being a playable experience. Adding FSR 2 never really fully compensates for this low performance. The best result is the Ultra Performance preset, which is effectively rendering the game at 1280 by 720 and upscaling it. Even so, the resulting 28 FPS average is pretty far away from what you would expect from native 720. Even native 1080 runs over 50% faster than this. One would hope that the image quality from the temporal upscaler would be worth some of the cost, and I'll get more into image quality comparisons later on, but there's a pretty big problem that's going to be hard to ignore. I'm going to assume this is one of the bugs we've been told to expect. I saw severe ghosting behind the car at every FSR 2 setting. I haven't tested this on any other graphics cards yet, so I don't know if it's specific to this GPU, this driver set, or what. If you've experienced anything similar, let me know in the comments. FSR 1, as expected, uses far less GPU processing power to upscale the image than the new version. FSR performance can beat a 30 FPS target on average, while rendering internally at 1920 by 1080. Again, running at native 1080 would still see over 40% higher FPS, and whether or not the spatial upscaling is worth the drop in performance is something only you can decide. Dropping to 2560 by 1440 seems to be a much more realistic target for this GPU. Native resolution could be argued as borderline playable, averaging 27.5 FPS, though of course this is still pretty far from smooth. For that you want to guarantee at least 30 FPS, and that means once more choosing the ultra performance setting. Render resolution is now down to 853 by 480, and image quality takes a serious hit as a result. A less aggressive option like balanced is less of a compromise, upscaling from about 1506 by 847 for a 37 FPS average and 1% lows of 27. Moving over to FSR 1, and it's not particularly surprising to see much higher frame rates. FSR Ultra Quality, which is an option that isn't available under FSR 2, already manages to hit over 30 FPS on average. FSR Quality can pretty much guarantee a 30 FPS minimum and 40 FPS average, and FSR Ultra Performance almost manages to reach the dizzying heights of 60 FPS. Upscaling with 1080 isn't usually recommended, but in the past I've suggested people looking to reach 60 FPS use a modest amount of FSR and the medium quality preset rather than native resolution and the low preset. That's tougher to recommend with FSR 2. A 60 FPS average at medium isn't possible on this GPU, except perhaps with some overclocking. 56 FPS is as close as my card got, and this was at FSR Performance. The render resolution by this point is 960 by 540, and image quality is starting to fall apart. Interestingly, there seems to be a limit at this point, as dropping to ultra performance only improves minimums and has little to no effect on the average. FSR 1, on the other hand, almost hits 60 FPS at performance and passes it by ultra performance. Anecdotally, I can tell you that driving in Cyberpunk handles way better at high FPS, to the point where at times it feels almost like GTA 5. And that brings me to... I'm afraid my capture card tends to drop frames constantly at 4K 30, so I'll instead go over a series of detailed comparisons at 2560 by 1440. Given the pretty significant performance deficit, you'd hope FSR 2 would at least look better than FSR 1. And I'm very happy to say that this is the case. Even compared to the same internal resolution, the spatial upscaler shows far more warping than the temporal upscaler and is noticeably softer. Putting performance aside for a moment, the difference in detail and smoothness is clear as day, but things get a little more complicated when I try to compare two 40 FPS options, FSR 1 Quality, scaling up from 1707 by 960, and FSR 2 Performance, scaled up from 1280 by 720. With FPS now almost equalised, the image quality difference is harder to appreciate. There is a difference, sure, but even if you press me to, I'd actually struggle to call a winner between the two here. Anyway, that's probably enough for my armchair quality analysis. I'll leave you to make up your own minds with the following side-by-side comparisons. On this specific GPU, I don't think FSR2 is a game changer, but that doesn't mean I'm not still on board the hype train. I think if you have something like a GTX 1070 or similar, this could be a great way of stepping up to the next resolution or quality setting without incurring too much of a cost in terms of performance. For the time being, the mod looks like it needs a little more work before it becomes truly useful. Let me know if you've tried the patch out in the comments, especially if you've seen the same ghosting artifacts as I have. Kindly do the usual YouTube things if you feel so inclined, and I'll see you next time.